start today's section, which is on digestion. So this chapter is divided into three parts. We talked about the vitamins and minerals already, and then the main part is the digestive system, and then the second part is going to be the excretory system, about the kidneys.
Digestion starts in the mouth. Teeth grind up the food. Then, special glands under the tongue pump out saliva to help break down and lubricate the food on its 12-hour, 13-foot journey through the gut. It'll pass from the stomach into the coils of the small intestine before finally passing into the large intestine. Waves of contracting muscle keep the food moving, a process called peristalsis. These contractions are so powerful, we can even eat upside down. For the first time, a new camera shows a high-definition view of how food travels through our bodies and into our stomachs.
So, sorry, Emily, since you're cooking food and I'm like showing you these videos.
Sure, this is so sad. I'm eating and like, okay.
I thought of you as soon as it started. Okay, what you're looking at now, that's the inside of the stomach. So when it's empty, you can see that it's kind of lies in folds because it has a great ability to stretch. So they've now developed technology so that they've got a camera inside of a little, like a capsule that you swallow, and it takes video of the entire digestive tract. If you have problems, either stomach problems or intestinal problems, it can like go through your whole tract and you poop it out. And yeah, if you have something like that, you're going to have to strain the poop and look for the capsule because it's quite expensive. Take it back to the doctor and they analyze the video. So that's how they get videos like this. Anyway, this is the stomach.
Food enters the stomach through a hole at the top.
I'm so sorry, Emily.
The stomach is a bag of muscle that churns, squashes, and squeezes food into liquid. At the same time, acids break the food down. The stomach walls protect themselves with a lining of mucus. Without it, the acids could digest parts of the stomach itself, causing stomach ulcers. About an hour later, the stomach squeezes the broken down food out through a tiny hole called the Pyloric Sphincter. The food enters the small intestine, an 11-foot coil of tube where we absorb most of the nutrients. The interior wall of the small intestine is lined with millions of microscopic projections called villi. These increase the surface area of the gut, making it easier to absorb nutrients. First, the pancreas pumps out a juice that neutralizes stomach acid. Then bile from the liver breaks down the fats into tiny droplets. Smaller droplets are easier for the intestine to absorb. After an hour and a half, the small intestine has absorbed most of the nutrients from the food. It's time for what remains to move on. It enters the large intestine through this, the ileocecal sphincter, a valve that keeps our food from going back where it came from. What's left is a mix of waste food and dead cells from the walls of the gut. The large intestine's main job is to extract water from it. Lots of bacteria live here too, but it isn't because of an infection. We actually need them. They produce enzymes that break down complex carbohydrates in our food, carbohydrates we couldn't otherwise digest. Finally, after about 12 hours, we expel what's left of our first meal.
Okay, so that's basically the whole journey. It's an interesting topic to have right after lunch. So digestion happens in the gastrointestinal tract or the digestive tract. In general medical terms, gastro refers to the stomach, and intestinal, obviously the small and large intestine. The gastrointestinal tract is basically one long continuous tube that starts at the mouth, ends at the anus. There are some organs that are directly part of this tract, like the esophagus, stomach, large intestine, small intestine, colon, and anus. But there's also, sorry, colon, large intestine, same thing. I was thinking of the rectum. There we go. There are other organs that are involved in digestion that are like connected to the digestive tract, but are not actually directly part of it. Okay, said that already. So there's going to be two types of digestion that we need to keep in mind. The first one is mechanical digestion. This is physically breaking down food into chunks. So obviously that would start at the mouth with your teeth. It also occurs in your stomach as well. The reason for mechanical digestion, not only does it make it easier to swallow things in pieces, imagine having to swallow like an entire cheeseburger at one time, but it also increases surface area. And when it comes to chemical digestion and enzymes, surface area is everything. So the breakdown of food begins with the mouth. You have many other vertebrates that don't have teeth, so they have, or not teeth made for cutting or chewing, so they have to swallow it whole or in large pieces. I just finished watching a series on sharks, and even though sharks have teeth, they don't chew their food. So they literally just, like the great white shark that eats, for example, whales, they have very specialized teeth, which I'll talk about in a second because I'm going to go over teeth. But basically, their teeth are made to rip off chunks and then swallow that chunk whole. So chewing speeds up digestion because it increases the surface area. Most mammals have specialized teeth, and oftentimes you can tell the diet of an animal just based on its teeth. And I'll show you some examples. So humans and bears are omnivores. We eat both. We eat both plants and animals. So we have teeth that are specialized for both of those. We have the incisors, which are the ones in the front. Those are made for cutting. So that's like the first bite. They're on the top and the bottom. Rodents like rice, oh my gosh, rats and mice, rabbits, hamsters, animals like that. They have very long incisors that grow continuously throughout their life. So if you have guinea pigs as well. So if you have a pet rabbit or a pet hamster or guinea pig, you have to give them things to chew on. Otherwise, their teeth can grow and start to warp. And I've actually seen some veterinary show I used to watch in the States where somebody brought their hamster in where they never gave them chew toys, like little sticks to chew on. And so the hamster's tooth had grown so long that it actually started to curl and it came out through its cheek because they didn't give it the proper tools to keep their teeth chiseled down. Now the canines, I guess you can call these the quote vampire teeth, very obvious on bears, top and bottom, a little bit obvious on humans. And you can check your own teeth. I've got one really pointy one and one flat one. I don't know why. That's just, anyway. The point of that is to grip, puncture, and tear. So especially on bears or even on carnivores, dogs and cats, they're going to be particularly very obvious when you look at their canines. Then we have what are called premolars. You've got first and second premolars. They're going to cut off or grind. Sometimes if you've got like something really tough, maybe like a muradillo, something like that, you can't bite it, but you have to use the kind of front side teeth to kind of really rip it off. And finally, you've got the back flat ones. These are the molars. These are to grind, crush, or cut. Now for carnivores, you're going to see mostly canines and premolars because you're going to see very sharp pointy teeth because they only eat meat. And so they don't have to grind. For herbivores, you're going to see premolars and molars and incisors. So if you think of a cow or a horse even, they've got really flat front teeth for ripping up the grass or the hay, and everything else is flat. And even if you watch a cow eating, they kind of move their jaw from side to side as they grind the grass between their molars. So like I said, different size and shape reflects diet. Now, inside the mouth, you have what's called a hard and soft palate. And the palate is basically the roof of the mouth. And you can actually, with your tongue, you can put it against the roof of your mouth and you can move it towards the back and you can tell where the hard palate becomes a soft palate. The reason for the hard palate is to have a hard surface that your tongue, this is your tongue, by the way, this entire thing is your tongue. So when you swallow, the bottom part of your tongue pushes down, and this part here, that's called the epiglottis, that is something that protects your airway. So you remember when we talked about the trachea? That's your trachea. That's the one in front. And you can feel like, even if you talk and you're like, you can feel like that it starts to affect your voice. That's where your vocal cords are. But your trachea is in the front. Your esophagus is behind the trachea. Now, the epiglottis, which I'll mention again in a minute, is extremely important. We've all, I'm sure, had experience of like, maybe accidentally taking a breath while eating or drinking something, or maybe our friend said something funny and we gasp for air, whatever, and you feel like you're dying because you've accidentally inhaled something into your trachea and you start coughing violently. I know when this happens to me, my entire face just becomes like lobster red because like all of the blood vessels are dilated. So it's meant to close. So when you swallow, let me remove all that. When you swallow, your tongue actually pushes this whole thing down. So it covers the trachea and the food that's in your mouth goes past and goes down the esophagus. But anyway, the main point is the hard palate. Your tongue works the food against the hard palate. And the purpose of that is to mix it with saliva and form it into a ball or a bolus. Now, the soft palate is behind the hard palate. It is made of folded membranes and it separates your nasal cavity from your mouth cavity. And remember back to the first chapter that we did, or no, second, when we talked about the pharynx. The pharynx just being the open area at the back of your mouth, kind of where the air goes in from your nose and also like the food or the water. That whole area is the pharynx. This is also a reason why it hasn't happened to me in a long time because I don't find many things funny anymore, which is kind of sad. Mostly I think because things that are meant to be funny aren't really funny, like TV shows and things. Anyway, if you've ever laughed so hard that like when you're drinking, it comes out of your nose, that's why. Because if you're in the middle of swallowing something and somebody says something funny, it's forced out of your nose. That did happen to me in high school in math club. Yes, I was in math club. I was a nerd. Anyway, in your mouth, you also begin what's called chemical digestion. Chemical digestion is the obviously chemical breakdown of food, not mechanical. This is going to happen through the action of enzymes. You have mucus in your saliva. Now, the mucus is there to help soften and lubricate food. And I have a very funny story about this. When I was in freshman in university, there was one professor who was retiring, and he taught wildlife field zoology. It was a senior level course, but because it was Professor Schramm's last year at school, they were offering the course with only one prerequisite, which was Bio 101. And of course, as freshmen biology majors, we all took Bio 101 first thing. So second semester, a bunch of us signed up for wildlife field zoology, and it was the most amazing class I've ever had in university, hands down. Second only to molecular bio, when I learned that my biology professor actually personally knew both Watson and Crick, the two guys that discovered the structure of DNA. I was like, mind blown. But so Professor Schramm ran the class, and every single Friday afternoon, we would go on a field trip. We would pile into two minivans. We each got issued a field journal and a pair of binoculars. And our first term, we studied birds. So we only looked at particularly ducks. I don't know why ducks, but we looked at birds, and it was really freaking hard because we had, for our lab practical, we had to learn 120 different species of birds. And you imagine looking at like in our lab, we had all kinds of stuffed specimens, and they were in trays according to species. And there was one species I'll always remember called the warblers. And they're basically just all small yellow birds. They're all yellow. But like one of them is called like, I don't know, like the burglar's warbler, because he's got like a little black stripe across his eyes, like he's wearing a bandana around his face, whatever, like a bank robber. Another one's called the chin strap warbler because he's got a black line under his chin that looks like a chin strap, but they're all basically yellow birds. I'm like, how am I going to tell the difference? Anyway, so yeah, every Friday we always went in minivans and basically just drove around in nature. And he'd be like, oh yeah, it's your 9 o'clock, you can see a freshwater duck and blah, blah, blah. And like, what species is that? So we're all scrambling to look in our journals to find out which one it is and identify it. Anyway, back to the saliva story. So we had 2 overnight field trips. The first one, we were staying in a lodge, and my school was kind of, well, where I'm from, there's basically like towns, and then there's a lot of like wilderness outside of the town until you get to the next town. So the town that my university was in was surrounded by a lot of natural prairies, which are like a kind of a grassland. And we stayed at this lodge, and because it was a senior level class open to freshmen, a lot of football players signed up for it. So I had a group of football players who decided that once the professor went to bed, they would break out their cooler. They had a bunch of beer in there, whatever. And they dared one of their friends to eat an entire loaf of white bread, but without any liquids at all. Like, they're like, you can't drink milk or drink water or anything. And so this guy was like, oh yeah, no problem. And the rest of us were like, you're insane. Cause you can't, I don't know if you've ever tried to eat a bunch of bread without liquids, but anyway, after about 5 slices, he was really having trouble because he's like, it feels like he's eating glue. And that's the point of saliva. When you eat things like crackers, bread, even potatoes to a certain extent, it absorbs a lot of fluid. And so he was like, he needless to say, he only got about halfway through, and he had to pony up, I think, $20 they bet him. But yeah, so that's the point of saliva. It helps to lubricate. That's the point of the story, lubrication. Because you got to swallow it, and all of the membranes in your digestive tract are very delicate, soft mucous membranes. And so if you don't lubricate the food and help to soften it up, it hurts when you swallow it. It also helps to hold the food together. Now, you also have one enzyme present in saliva called salivary amylase. And if you're not familiar with the amylases, they're a class of compounds that break down carbohydrates. And they're going to break down complex carbs to maltose, which is a disaccharide. Is it 2S, 1S, 2Cs? Correct. Okay, so the only thing that begins to be chemically broken down in your mouth is the carbohydrates. Right, disaccharide maltose. All right, saliva also helps to flush food and bacteria from between your teeth. There's also a bactericidal enzyme in saliva that helps to keep the populations of bacteria in your mouth down. Cidal means to kill. Well, the ul makes it an adjective. Usually it's side. Like if you think of suicide, that's to kill yourself. Homicide, homo is man. Side, again, to kill. And the reason why we care about keeping the population of bacteria in our mouth down is because they will metabolize the sugar in our food and they produce acids. And those acids are going to eat away at our tooth enamel, causing tooth decay or cavities. When we sleep, the production of saliva decreases. It makes sense. Obviously, you don't want to like drool on your pillow every night. And so during the nighttime, the bacteria can multiply, and that is responsible for morning breath. So once you have successfully chewed the food, you have lubricated it with saliva, it is now time to enter the esophagus. So the bolus, or the ball of food, is forced into the pharynx. Again, that's the open area at the back of your mouth by swallowing. Now, this is an actual human being, a cadaver, obviously, dead person who has been cut in half. You can even see his nose hairs up here. But this shows, this is the tongue here. You've got the hard palate. That's the soft palate. Here's the epiglottis, right? Nice little flap of tissue. And this is your trachea. Here is your esophagus. Okay, and then your nasal cavity is up here. Again, pharynx, open area at the back of the mouth. And like I said, this is the passageway for both air and food. So it is very important for your epiglottis to be pushed down and cover your trachea when you swallow so that you do not get food or liquid in your lungs. Now, the word epiglottis comes from epi, which means upon, and glottis, which means the tongue. So it's like a little flap of tongue that goes upon or on top of the trachea. So the bolus passes into your esophagus. Your esophagus is a muscular tube about 25 centimeters long that connects your pharynx to your stomach. There are two muscle layers to the esophagus. Now, musculature, or the layers of muscle, the organization of muscle, is going to be really important in your digestive system for two reasons. Because muscles, remember, contract in only one direction. So depending on the, what do you call it, like the layout of muscles, they're going to contract in different ways. So there's an inner circular layer that wraps around the esophagus. And there's an outer longitudinal layer that runs the length of the tube. So if this is your esophagus here, you have one layer of muscles which lie in circles, so it can squeeze, it can constrict, right? And the other layer goes lengthwise, so it can push like that. And these two layers are going to coordinate with each other in a process called peristalsis. So the alternating contractions of these muscle layers are going to push the stomach, or sorry, push the food through the esophagus to the stomach. This is a process called peristalsis. And I'll show you, there's a video while I let my dog in because he's whining. This is you'll see the wave from peristalsis from the two muscle layers. There it is. So that's the wave, peristalsis. And here comes another wave. Now, I do want to point out just how nice and smooth and pink and slimy this looks. Your entire digestive tract looks like this. It should look like this. This means that it's healthy. You want a nice, smooth, pink, mucousy, like glossy, slimy digestive tract. So the next organ is the stomach. This is going to be involved in both mechanical and chemical digestion. So you can see from the diagram, there's 3 layers of muscle here. We've got circular going around this way. We've got longitudinal going this way. And we have what's called oblique. Oblique just means diagonal. I don't know if any of you are into like gym workouts or whatever, but like, you know, when they talk about ab muscles, the abs, like 6-packs or whatever, the muscles on either side of that, the left side and the right side, those are called the obliques. And there's like different exercises you can do to what do you call that? To firm up your obliques. So doing sit-ups is not going, it'll help your abs, but it's not necessarily going to help your obliques, the ones on the side. All right, so the stomach. Now, a lot of times, let me show off my amazing artistic skills for a second. Okay, that's person, obviously. All right, a lot of times we will say, some very odd t-shirt he's wearing, but anyway. We'll say like when we have stomach problems, we often like point around our belly button. And for some reason, my belly button was like, I drew it like really huge. We'll say like, especially kids, you know, like when kids are like, they'll pat their tummy and they're like, oh, I have a tummy ache or whatever, but your stomach is actually really high up. It's just underneath your diaphragm. If you remember, your diaphragm is the muscle that comes right up here. So your heart is right around there and your stomach is right there. So if you have stomach problems, a lot of times they refer to it as heartburn because it's close to the heart. It's actually a lot higher than most people think that it is. Now, this is an actual stomach. I think it's a pig stomach. And so you can see when it's empty, it's really highly folded on the inside, again, because it can expand a lot. It is shaped like a backwards J, and it's very elastic, again, lies in folds when it's empty. Now, when you need food and your stomach is empty and the muscles contract, that's when you hear the of your stomach growling, because it's like you still have liquid and mucus in your stomach. And so you're hearing the contraction of your smooth muscles and the movement of that fluid. Right. So as I was saying, 3 layers of muscle. The reason why you have 3 different layers is because it's going to contract the stomach in different ways to actually physically break up the food in your stomach. And this is how the stomach participates in mechanical digestion. Now that is a beautiful looking stomach lining. That's what it should look like. Nice, pink, smooth, and shiny from the mucus. Now the stomach in particular really has to be covered with mucus for a couple of reasons. Number one, your stomach acid. Your stomach acid has a pH of 2, and it's hydrochloric acid. If you were to get that on your skin, you would get chemical burns from that. It would be very, very corrosive. So your stomach wall has to be protected from the stomach acid. But most importantly, number 2, the chemical digestion that occurs in your stomach is through the beginning digestion of proteins. There is a protein that's released into your stomach. When that protein hits the acidic environment of your stomach, the protein's converted into an enzyme that digests protein. What is the wall of your stomach made of? It's made of like tissue and muscles that are made of proteins. So without that mucus layer of protection, the enzyme would literally start to digest your stomach. So 2 reasons for that. Now, you don't see it here, but you'll see it in a second when I show you a picture of a stomach that's suffering from something called gastritis. You have openings in your stomach called gastric pits. So if we were able to like X-ray vision, you would see a little pit, and then underneath it is a small little duct, and then there's a gastric gland underneath there. Okay, that looked kind of dirty, but anyway, you get my point. There's the pit is an opening to underneath it. There's what's called a gastric gland. The gastric glands are going to release the secretions into the stomach. That's going to be hydrochloric acid, the protein, pepsin, and the mucus as well. There we go. So there's the gastric pits, and they lead to the gastric glands. Right, so here's the gastric pit. You've got the mucus layer, and that is going to protect from hydrochloric acid and pepsin, which turns into, or sorry, no, I forget now, pepsinogen turns into, pepsinogen is the protein. Pepsin is the enzyme. All right. Okay, so you've got different cells that make each of these fluids. You have some cells that make the mucus, some cells that make the enzymes, and others that secrete the acid. All of these mix together to form the digestive fluid. Okay, so here we go. The pepsinogen is the protein, and that's converted into the enzyme pepsin by the low pH of your stomach, and this digests protein. It splits protein into peptides. Again, we are not at the amino acid level yet. So even though in the mouth we've begun to digest carbohydrates and we've begun to digest proteins in the stomach, it's nowhere near completion because we have not digested anything to its fullest extent. We don't have glucose, we don't have amino acids yet. So hydrochloric acid also has 2 functions. 1, it creates the acidic environment necessary to change the protein pepsinogen into pepsine. But 2, it also helps to dissolve minerals and to kill any pathogenic bacteria that might be present. But I guess like a side benefit is that it prevents the digestion of, maybe not a benefit, but it prevents digestion of carbohydrates and fats. So the carbohydrates that were starting to be digested in your mouth, it now stops in your stomach. Like I said, the mucus is vital to the survival of your stomach. It protects your stomach lining both from the hydrochloric acid and from the pepsin that digests protein. Now, what happens if you have inflammation of the stomach? Now, the prefix gaster or gastro means stomach for any future doctors that happen to be studying for BMAT. And itis means inflammation, if I could spell. Inflammation of. Now, you can literally put itis at the end of anything and it will mean inflammation of. So you can have pancreatitis, that's inflammation of the pancreas, tonsillitis, inflammation of the tonsils. Those are organs at the back of your throat that I think Are they part of the immune system? I can't remember exactly what they do. But if they get infected, then they can be cut out. And what was the other big one? Appendicitis. Appendicitis. Again, inflammation of the appendix. The appendix is a vestigial feature, which means that it is no longer of use in modern humans. But if it gets infected, it can kill you. So there's that. If these things get infected and you need to have them removed, you get whatever the root of the organ name is, and then the ending is ectomy. So this leads to a tonsillectomy, and this is an appendectomy. You cannot get a pancreasectomy. You can't do that because you need your pancreas. And Friday, you'll find out why. I'm not going to have enough time to do it today. But you cannot have an ectomy of your pancreas. Anyway, let's take all that away. Like I said, gastro relating to the stomach, itis, inflammation. And a lot of gastritis is caused by the presence of a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. Now, this is gastritis. You can see where I was talking about before how the stomach should look nice and pink and smooth and glossy. This obviously is experiencing problems because it is dotted with these bloody spots, right? So this is what's called an endoscopy. Basically, when they take a long tube, I think I showed it to you during when I was teaching you about the larynx and the throat with the beatboxers. They take this long flexible tube, it's got a light and a camera at the end. They stick it down your throat, through your esophagus into your stomach, and they have a look around. What you're going to see in this video is what's called a biopsy. So you'll see these little metal pincers come in and pinch off a piece of the stomach lining, and they'll send it to pathology to look for any kind of underlying disease. But this obviously is not a healthy stomach. So you can actually see where the gastric pits are. That's like, oh, it's nasty. There's the biopsy tool. You go in there and they just pinch off a chunk. And yeah, you'll bleed, but that's what your platelets are for. So then they'll try to determine the underlying cause of this. It's not a disease, but a condition. There we go. Now, an ulcer is an open sore in the stomach lining. This is when you actually get a hole from that protective mucus lining. And here you can see this is even a bleeding ulcer. That's really bad, very painful.